The Faith Militant Uprising was one of the earliest and most dangerous challenges to Targaryen authority, occurring during the reign of Aenys I and continuing into the rule of Maegor the Cruel. This rebellion was sparked when Aenys I, following his father Aegon the Conqueror's death, made the controversial decision to marry his son, Prince Aegon, to his daughter, Princess Rhaena. The Faith of the Seven, which held enormous influence over the common people, condemned this incestuous union as an abomination against the gods. The High Septon denounced the Targaryens as false kings who defied divine law and called upon the faithful to rise up against the Dragonlords. The Faith Militant, consisting of two military orders, the Warriors' Sons, who were knights, and the Poor Fellows, who were common soldiers, took up arms against the crown, turning the Sept into fortresses and the streets into battlefields. Aenys I proved too weak to effectively combat this threat. His attempts at negotiation and appeasement only emboldened the Faith Militant further, allowing the rebellion to spread like wildfire across the kingdoms. When Aenys died under mysterious circumstances, possibly from the stress of the conflict, his half-brother Maegor seized the throne and responded with unprecedented brutality. Maegor the Cruel, as he would forever be known, outlawed both orders of the Faith Militant and declared that any man who took up arms for the faith would be executed without trial. His response was methodical and merciless. He personally led campaigns against the faith's strongholds, burning septs that harbored militants and executing thousands of warriors in public displays meant to terrorize the population into submission. The warriors' sons, who once numbered in the thousands, were hunted down one by one. Maegor offered a choice to the Poor Fellows: abandon their weapons and return to their lives, or face execution. Most chose survival. The rebellion finally ended when Maegor died under mysterious circumstances on the Iron Throne itself, found with multiple wounds from the throne's swords. His nephew, Jaehaerys I, who succeeded him, took a different approach, negotiating a peace with the faith that allowed the religious institution to maintain its influence while disbanding its military orders permanently. The Faith Militant Uprising demonstrated that the Targaryens, despite their dragons, could not rule through fear alone. It established the delicate balance between the crown and the faith that would persist for centuries, and proved that religious authority could mobilize the common people in ways that even dragons could not easily suppress. The scars left by this conflict influenced how future Targaryen kings approached matters of faith and tradition, making them more cautious about openly defying the beliefs held by the majority of their subjects. The Dance of the Dragons, meaning the war of succession between Targaryen siblings, is perhaps the most devastating civil war in Westerosi history, tearing the realm apart and nearly destroying House Targaryen itself. This conflict erupted following the death of King Viserys I, who had named his daughter, Rhaenyra, as his heir, breaking centuries of male primogeniture tradition. However, when Viserys died, his widow, Queen Alicent Hightower, and the small council moved swiftly to crown his eldest son, Aegon II, instead, arguing that no woman should sit the Iron Throne, and that the lords of Westeros would never accept a queen regnant. Rhaenyra, who was at Dragonstone when her father died, refused to accept this usurpation, viewing it as a theft of her birthright and a betrayal of her father's explicit wishes. The realm quickly divided into two factions: the Greens, who supported Aegon II and valued tradition and the established order of male succession, and the Blacks, who supported Rhaenyra and honored the late king's decree that his chosen heir should rule regardless of gender. This was not merely a dispute over succession, it represented a fundamental clash between progressive and conservative values in Westerosi society. The Dance of the Dragons saw dragon riders fighting dragon riders in aerial battles that devastated entire regions. Castles burned, cities starved, and the small folk suffered immensely as armies marched back and forth across the continent. Major battles, like the Battle of Rook's Rest, saw dragons fall from the sky. their riders consumed by dragonfire. The storming of the dragon pit in King's Landing resulted in the deaths of multiple dragons, killed by mobs of common people who had grown to fear and hate the beasts that brought such destruction. Rhaenyra briefly held King's Landing, but her reign was marked by paranoia and harsh taxation that turned the population against her. She fled when Aegon II's forces returned, only to be captured and executed, fed to Aegon's dragon in front of her own son. Aegon II himself survived only slightly longer, dying from poison administered by his own supporters, who saw him as a liability. The war officially ended when Rhaenyra's son was crowned as Aegon III, known forever after as the Dragonbane, because the last dragons died during his reign. The Dance of the Dragons killed most of the Targaryen dragons and decimated the royal family, leaving only a handful of survivors. The historical significance of this rebellion cannot be overstated. It established that disputed successions could literally tear the realm apart. It showed the destructive potential of civil war when both sides possessed weapons of mass destruction, and it effectively ended the Targaryen dominance through dragon power, as the creatures never recovered their former numbers. The dance also cemented the principle that the Iron Throne would pass through male lines whenever possible, as the realm's nobility wanted to avoid such conflicts in the future. The trauma of this war echoed through generations, influencing succession decisions and political marriages for centuries to come. The Blackfyre Rebellions, meaning the series of 5 major uprisings spanning nearly 6 decades, were attempts by the legitimized bastard line of House Targaryen to claim the Iron Throne for themselves. The conflict began with Daemon Blackfyre, the legitimized bastard son of King Aegon IV, who had been given the Valyrian steel sword Blackfyre by his father, a symbolic gesture that many interpreted as Aegon IV, naming Daemon his true heir over his legitimate son, Daeron II. Daemon was a warrior of legendary prowess, charismatic, handsome, and beloved by the small folk and many lords who saw him as the embodiment of everything a king should be. In contrast, Daeron II was scholarly, bookish, and rumored, though falsely, to be the bastard son of his mother's affair with a Dornish prince. Daemon's claim gained support from those who resented Daeron's peaceful integration of Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms through marriage rather than conquest, xenophobic lords who despised the Dornish influence at court, and ambitious nobles who saw an opportunity to advance their own positions. The First Blackfyre Rebellion erupted in 196 AC and culminated in the Battle of the Redgrass Field, one of the bloodiest battles in Westerosi history. Daemon Blackfyre and his twin sons were killed by Bloodraven, the Loyalist commander and King's Hand, effectively ending the First Uprising. However, Daemon's surviving sons and supporters continued the cause, launching 4 more rebellions over the following decades. Each Blackfyre Rebellion followed a similar pattern. Exiled Blackfyre pretenders would gather support from foreign powers, particularly the Free Cities, secure backing from discontented Westerosi lords, and launch an invasion that ultimately failed. The Second Rebellion in 211 AC was crushed before it truly began. The third, in 219 AC, saw the pretender Daemon II killed in battle. The fourth, in 236 AC, ended with the death of another pretender, and the fifth and final rebellion in 260 AC concluded with the death of Meleys the Monstrous during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. The Blackfyre Rebellions kept the realm in a state of periodic instability for nearly 60 years, draining resources, disrupting trade, and causing thousands of deaths. They demonstrated that legitimacy alone was not enough to secure the throne, that the perception of worthiness mattered as much as bloodline, and that bastards, even legitimized ones, would always face questions about their right to rule. The conflict also showed how foreign powers could exploit internal divisions in Westeros, using Blackfyre pretenders as proxies to weaken the Iron Throne. The Blackfyre threat forced Targaryen kings to maintain large military forces, develop extensive spy networks, and remain vigilant against potential traitors within their own courts. The historical significance of the Blackfyre Rebellions extends beyond the Targaryen era, as the question of legitimacy versus merit that they raised would resurface repeatedly in Westerosi politics, continuing to influence debates about succession and the very nature of kingship itself. Robert's Rebellion, meaning the war that ended Targaryen rule, is the most consequential uprising in recent Westerosi history, fundamentally altering the political landscape of the Seven Kingdoms. The rebellion was sparked by a series of events, beginning with Prince Rhaegar Targaryen's abduction, or, as some claim, elopement, with Lyanna Stark, who was betrothed to Robert Baratheon. When Lyanna's brother, Brandon Stark, rode to King's Landing demanding that Rhaegar answer for this insult, the Mad King Aerys II arrested him and his companions, then summoned their fathers to court, where he brutally executed both Brandon and his father, Rickard Stark, in a horrific display of cruelty. Aerys then demanded that Jon Arryn, Warden of the Vale, execute his two wards, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. Instead, Jon Arryn raised his banners in rebellion, calling his bannermen to war. Robert, as the aggrieved party whose betrothed had been taken, became the face of the rebellion, though the cause quickly evolved from personal grievance to a fight against Aerys' tyranny. The Mad King's increasingly paranoid and cruel behavior had alienated much of the realm, and many lords saw this as an opportunity to remove a dangerous lunatic from power. The war saw several major battles, including the Battle of the Trident, where Robert killed Prince Rhaegar in single combat, crushing the royalist forces' morale. The sack of King's Landing by Tywin Lannister's forces, who had claimed to come to Aerys' aid but instead turned on him, proved decisive. Jaime Lannister, the young Kingsguard sworn to protect Aerys, killed the Mad King himself, earning the name Kingslayer. Princess Elia Martell and her children were brutally murdered by Lannister forces, an atrocity that would poison relations between houses for generations. Robert was crowned king, establishing a new dynasty, though his claim was partially legitimized through his Targaryen grandmother, making him a distant cousin to the family he overthrew. The outcome of Robert's rebellion was the end of nearly 3 centuries of Targaryen rule. The surviving Targaryens, Viserys and his infant sister, Daenerys, fled into exile across the Narrow Sea, where they would spend years plotting their return. Robert's reign, while successful militarily, proved less effective politically, as the king lost interest in governance, preferring hunting and drinking to the tedious work of administration. The historical significance of this rebellion extends far beyond the change in dynasty. It established that even a royal house with dragons in its history could be overthrown through conventional military force. It demonstrated that tyranny, even from a ruling house, could unite disparate factions against a common enemy. And it showed that personal honor and duty, as embodied by the rebels, could triumph over the supposed divine right of kings. Robert's rebellion set in motion events that would continue to shape Westeros for decades, including the tensions between the Starks, Lannisters, and the exiled Targaryens that would eventually explode into the War of the Five Kings. The Greyjoy Rebellion, meaning Balon Greyjoy's attempt to restore Iron Island's independence, occurred 6 years after Robert's rebellion, when the new Baratheon dynasty was still consolidating power. Balon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, declared himself King of the Iron Islands and the North, invoking the ancient ways of the Ironborn, who believed in taking what they wanted through reaving and raiding rather than submitting to mainlander rule. Balon's motivations stemmed from a combination of personal ambition, cultural pride, and resentment toward the Iron Throne's authority. The Ironborn had a long history of independence before Aegon's conquest, and Balon sought to reclaim that lost glory. He viewed Robert's weakened position following the recent civil war as an opportunity to break free, believing the new king would be too preoccupied with consolidating his rule to mount an effective response. Balon's strategy involved launching raids on the northern coast, attacking fishing villages and coastal settlements, but he severely miscalculated both the resolve of King Robert and the unity of the great houses. Robert, alongside Eddard Stark, whose lands had been attacked, assembled a massive royal force that descended upon the Iron Islands with overwhelming strength. The rebellion was crushed decisively, with the royal fleet destroying the Iron Fleet and the combined armies besieging Pike, the Greyjoy stronghold. Balon's two eldest sons were killed during the fighting, and he was forced to surrender. His surviving son, Theon, was taken as a ward of House Stark, essentially a hostage to ensure Balon's future loyalty. The outcome demonstrated that the new Baratheon regime, despite being recently established, could effectively project power and maintain order. The swift and brutal response to Balon's rebellion sent a clear message to any other lords considering similar actions, that challenges to the Iron Throne's authority would be met with decisive military force. The historical significance of the Greyjoy Rebellion lies in its demonstration that regional independence movements could not succeed against a united Seven Kingdoms. It reinforced the importance of the hostage system as a tool for ensuring loyalty, with Theon's captivity serving as a constant reminder of the price of rebellion. The failed uprising also had profound personal consequences. The loss of his sons hardened Balon, and his eventual decision years later to launch another rebellion during the War of the Five Kings would stem partly from this earlier humiliation. The Greyjoy Rebellion proved that cultural identity and ancient traditions were insufficient to overcome military reality, and that the Iron Throne, even under a new dynasty, possessed the strength to maintain the unity Aegon the Conqueror had forged 3 centuries earlier. The War of the Five Kings, meaning the massive multi-sided civil war following Robert Baratheon's death, represents the most complex and devastating conflict in recent memory, erupting when the realm fractured into competing factions, each claiming the right to rule. The war began when Joffrey Baratheon, the supposed son of Robert, was crowned king in King's Landing. However, Eddard Stark discovered that Joffrey was actually the product of incest between Queen Cersei and her twin brother, Jaime, making him a bastard with no legitimate claim to the throne. When Eddard attempted to reveal this truth, he was arrested and executed, sparking immediate rebellion. Robb Stark was proclaimed king in the north by his bannermen, seeking independence from the Iron Throne while simultaneously avenging his father's murder. Renly Baratheon, Robert's youngest brother, declared himself king based on might and popular support, while his older brother, Stannis, claimed the throne as Robert's true heir. Balon Greyjoy declared himself king of the Iron Islands for the second time, and across the Narrow Sea, the exiled Daenerys Targaryen, though not immediately involved, began building her own power base with the goal of reclaiming the Iron Throne for House Targaryen. The war saw numerous battles, shifting alliances, and political maneuvering. Renly was assassinated through blood magic wielded by Stannis' advisor, the Red Priestess Melisandre, allowing Stannis to absorb most of Renly's forces. Robb Stark won every battle he fought, earning the title the Young Wolf, but he made critical political errors, including breaking his marriage pact with House Frey to marry for love. This betrayal led to the Red Wedding, where Robb, his mother Catelyn, and most of his army were massacred by the Freys and Boltons, acting on Lannister orders. In one of the most shocking betrayals in Westerosi history, Stannis' assault on King's Landing was repelled at the Battle of the Blackwater through the combined efforts of Tyrion Lannister's defensive strategy and the arrival of Tywin Lannister's army in alliance with the Tyrells. Balon Greyjoy died under mysterious circumstances, effectively removing the Iron Islands from the conflict, though his brother Euron would later reignite Ironborn ambitions. The war officially ended with the consolidation of power by House Lannister, ruling through the puppet king Tommen Baratheon after Joffrey's assassination. However, regional conflicts continued, and Stannis remained in rebellion in the north. The outcome left the Seven Kingdoms devastated, with the Riverlands in ruins, the north occupied by Bolton forces, the Reach drained of resources, and the common people suffering from years of warfare, famine, and banditry. The War of the Five Kings demonstrated several critical lessons about Westerosi politics. that numerical superiority and military skill were insufficient without political acumen, as Robb Stark learned that ancient customs like guest right could be violated when ambition outweighed honor, that alliances were fluid and betrayal common when personal interest dictated, and that control of the capital and the Iron Throne itself conferred legitimacy that was difficult to challenge. The historical significance of this war extends far beyond the immediate carnage. It shattered the illusion of stability that Robert's reign had provided, exposed the weakness of the central government when succession was disputed, and created power vacuums that allowed new players like Petyr, Baelish, and the Faith Militant to gain influence. The conflict also accelerated the return of magic to the world, with dragons born in the east, the White Walkers advancing from the north, and Red Priests wielding powers unseen for centuries. The War of the Five Kings was not just a rebellion, it was a fundamental reshaping of the political and supernatural landscape of Westeros. The Faith Militant Uprising under the High Sparrow, meaning the religious movement that seized power in King's Landing, represents a different kind of rebellion, one driven not by noble ambition, but by the rage of the common people and the desire to hold the powerful accountable. Unlike previous rebellions led by lords and kings, this uprising emerged from the small folk, who had suffered through years of war, famine, and the predations of both armies and outlaws. The movement began when Cersei Lannister, serving as Queen Regent, made the catastrophic decision to restore the Faith Militant, believing she could use them as a tool against her political enemies, particularly Margaery Tyrell. She allowed the Faith to reform the military orders that Maegor the Cruel had disbanded centuries earlier. The High Sparrow, a seemingly humble Septon, became High Septon and immediately began using his newfound power to challenge the corruption and immorality of the nobility. The Faith Militant arrested Margaery Tyrell for perjury, Loras Tyrell for homosexuality, and eventually Cersei herself for adultery, incest, and murder, forcing her to perform a humiliating walk of atonement through King's Landing. The movement gained massive popular support as the small folk saw the Faith finally holding the Highborn accountable for their sins and crimes. The High Sparrow's power grew to the point where he could dictate terms to the crown itself, effectively controlling King's Landing through moral authority and the zealotry of his followers. The outcome came during Cersei's trial, when she chose to destroy the Great Sept of Baelor with wildfire, killing the High Sparrow, Margaery, the Tyrell leadership, and hundreds of nobles and septons in a single catastrophic explosion. This act of mass murder eliminated the Faith Militant leadership and ended their direct political power, but it came at an enormous cost. Cersei's son, Tommen, committed suicide upon witnessing the destruction, and Cersei seized the Iron Throne for herself, becoming the first queen regnant in Westerosi history through sheer ruthlessness rather than legitimate claim. The historical significance of the Faith Militant Uprising lies in what it revealed about the underlying tensions in Westerosi society. The movement demonstrated that the common people's tolerance for noble excess had limits, and that religious authority could mobilize the masses in ways that threatened the entire social order. It showed that moral legitimacy could challenge political power, and that the nobles' assumption of immunity from consequences was not absolute. The uprising also highlighted the dangerous intersection of religious fundamentalism and political power, as the Faith Militant's righteousness led to its own form of tyranny. The violent end of this rebellion through Cersei's wildfire plot marked a turning point where the rules of political conflict were abandoned entirely, replacing calculated scheming with apocalyptic destruction. The Faith Militant Uprising proved that rebellions could come from unexpected directions, and that the greatest threat to the established order might not be rival claimants to the throne, but the anger of those who had been ignored and exploited for too long. The Targaryen Restoration, meaning Daenerys Targaryen's invasion of Westeros, represents both a rebellion against the current regime and an attempt to reclaim what she viewed as her family's stolen throne. Having spent years in exile building her power base in Essos, Daenerys returned to Westeros with 3 dragons, a massive army, and a mission to break the wheel of the system that had allowed tyrants to rule for centuries. Her cause was complicated by the revelation that she was not the last Targaryen, that Jon Snow, whom she fell in love with, was actually Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, and therefore had a stronger claim to the throne than she did. Daenerys's campaign initially followed conventional military strategy. She allied with Dorne and the Reach, attacked the Lannister supply lines, and besieged King's Landing. However, her increasing frustration with the losses she suffered, including 2 of her dragons and her closest advisors, combined with her isolation in Westeros, where she was viewed as a foreign invader rather than a liberator, pushed her toward more extreme measures. The conflict culminated in the destruction of King's Landing, where, despite the city's surrender, Daenerys used her dragon to burn the entire city, killing hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians in an act of unprecedented destruction. She claimed this was necessary to establish a new world order, arguing that mercy for the current generation would doom all future generations to continued tyranny. The outcome was Daenerys's assassination by Jon Snow, who recognized that her vision of liberation had transformed into genocidal tyranny. The Targaryen Restoration ended not with dragons ruling Westeros, but with the dynasty seemingly extinct once again. Though Jon survived, he was exiled to the Night's Watch, and the Seven Kingdoms were left without a clear ruling structure, eventually forming a council to elect Bran Stark as king and granting independence to the north. The historical significance of Daenerys's invasion is profound and multifaceted. It demonstrated that even noble intentions and righteous causes could lead to monstrous outcomes when absolute power faced resistance. It showed that dragons alone could not legitimate rule, and that conquest without popular support created tyranny rather than liberation. The Restoration attempt also revealed the fundamental problem with hereditary monarchy, that bloodline claims could motivate devastating wars regardless of the claimant's fitness to rule. Daenerys's transformation from liberator to destroyer became a cautionary tale about revolutionary movements that promised to break existing systems while simply replacing them with new forms of authoritarianism. The failure of the Targaryen Restoration led to the first election of a king in Westerosi history, potentially marking the beginning of a new political order. Though whether this would truly be different from the cycle of rebellions and wars that preceded it remained uncertain. And with that, we've covered 8 of the most significant rebellions against the Iron Throne. From the Faith Militant's holy war to Daenerys's catastrophic invasion, each uprising shaped the political landscape of Westeros in profound ways. These conflicts demonstrate that the Iron Throne, despite being forged from conquered swords and symbolizing ultimate authority, has always been vulnerable to challenges from those with sufficient cause, conviction, and military strength. The pattern that emerges shows that rebellions succeed or fail based not just on military might, but on legitimacy, popular support, political acumen, and the willingness to pay the terrible costs that civil war demands.